this isn't going to be a good idea by releasing a review of an episode that hasn't been aired in America yet. But believe me when I say this, is that this episode, Big Borrow and Steele, has people having so much mixed feelings towards, and to tell you the truth, after watching this episode and thinking about it, this episode is basically what everyone didn't want. And believe me, if I had to wait for this episode to come out, then I'm pretty sure that it would probably be a little too late, considering that people's expectations will probably be through the roof, knowing full well that they don't want this episode to be a Lincoln torture episode, all the while wanting it to be a good Lincoln and Lola episode. But it's not the case. Not even close, because what this episode took from the Taunting Owl, it's not completely, but it doesn't follow the format of Lincoln and Lynn having an episode together, which is the same format here where it's not really a Lincoln and Lola episode, because with other of Lincoln's sisters being part of this is mostly a Lincoln carrying the episode similar to Bizarratorium, and with the same problems of what that episode has by not having Rita as the main character completely. It really feels like that the more I look at these episodes, Lincoln being mostly the problem doesn't really feel like I should really go against Lincoln completely, and knowing full well that the other characters don't contribute much, with Lincoln being the one carrying the entire episode. The premise is that Lincoln is trying to find a really rare David Steele collectible by looking inside one of the question mark boxes that are mostly common in the real world by finding a really rare collectible. And since that he is all out of money, he goes to Lola, who he writes a contract to by doing anything that she does, and after using all the money to find the rare collectible, he has to pay off Lola after spending every single dollar off of the question mark boxes of David Steele characters in order to pay off his debt from her. And to tell you the truth, that would have been fine in order to have the episode centered around Lincoln and Lola, but the thing is, they don't even bother to make Lincoln any better. And I'm not saying this to go against his character, because to tell you the truth, going against his character has become a lot more repetitive, mainly the fact that this episode alone sums up a lot that they're trying way too hard to make Lincoln being at fault, but at the same time difficult to root against, because he asked Lenny, Lucy, Lisa, Lynn, and Lily, which I'm having a difficult time believing, to borrow money in order to pay off Lola when it came to the debt. And in all honesty, the false advertising I've seen involving the description of this episode involving Lincoln and Lola is false. And even though it isn't false advertising when it comes to the debt that Lincoln needs to pay, it also shows that this episode's problems is the fact that they don't even bother giving Lincoln a chance to bond more with his sisters, with one at a time, all the while not making Lincoln having problems. And I understand that characters like Lincoln have flaws, but at this point, when it comes to the flaws that he had in this episode, I'm not buying it, and I'm still not rooting against it. Guys, if we really had to wait for this episode to come out in America, if it wasn't on Kim Cartoon right now, I'm pretty sure that I would have waited like everyone else. But whenever I do these videos ahead of time when it comes to spoiling everything, believe me, it's not worth waiting for if the spoilers don't mean much to this episode, because at least in Bizarratorium, it kind of feels like a major episode to wait until when it airs in America. And even though it was mixed and people still didn't like it, at the very least it still felt important. But when it comes to this episode, it really feels like that it's not that important at all, and yet it's still a bad episode for how the execution of them all just doesn't even feel like it's worth waiting for it to come out. So, like, I have to be real with you that the other episodes have better potential once they come out in America. Because as far as I'm concerned, this episode alone really feels like everything won on not to make an episode centered around Lincoln trying to pay off the debt with not only for Lola, but for mostly some of his Loud Sisters. Because the more I see it, it really feels like he's using his mental state every time he hangs out with the Loud Sisters, and it's not an exaggeration because he has a vision with the amount of times that he ruined the gifts and stuff that were from Lola. He has a vision of him being older while hanging out with Lola by paying off her debt. And to tell you the truth, for how he's thinking about this without one of his friends, really shows that he's really losing it. Because to tell you the truth, as much as his Loud Sisters have every right to get the money that he borrowed, for what I see, it really feels like that he can't be able to make things right for himself, all the while making things right for his sisters. Because after the many times I've seen him in previous episodes, when it came to how dysfunctional his family is, they're also toxic. But believe me when I say toxic, I mean mainly the fact that they just don't do much, and the toxicity gets in the way of them not stopping themselves on being better than Lincoln. Because even if they deserve the money, at the same time, they're still not better than Lincoln in this episode, even though that Lori described that in the limo episode from season 1. The thing is, the Loud Sisters, mainly Lenny, Lynn, Lucy, Lisa, and Lily, are tours. And Lola has becoming a tour since the second half of the episode doesn't focus on her anymore, aside from Lincoln trying to pay off her debt, only for him to deal with the other Loud Sisters. And to tell you the truth, even though that if you're going to have the Loud Sisters be part of this debt thing, at the very least, don't make them tours, because they're becoming more tours than how they were in the earlier seasons of the Loud House. And even though they were an obstacle, at the very least, they still do a lot more in the earlier seasons when it comes to them not being tours. Because the tours I've seen is the fact that they're mainly just characters, or just random people, not really random, but just people in general that Lincoln needs to pay off, which for me personally makes them less sisters, knowing full well that when they need favors from him, they don't even think clearly on how that this isn't helping. And to tell you the truth, for how Lincoln is owing to them, the fact that they just don't easily think of how it's just becoming a more ridiculous and redundant thing that they keep doing from time to time. I don't even think that them being obstacles isn't really a thing in this season. They're becoming more like tours. You see, when Lincoln is distracted while the other Loud Sisters are trying to remind him when it comes to the hints, I'm gonna be real with you, just because when Lincoln stated that he remembered, which is gonna be his top priority of paying off the Loud Sisters, the best that the Loud Sisters can do is just talk to Lincoln rather than just hinting it at him, or when it came to an eavesdrop level. Because for me personally, it's not gonna make any difference if they're gonna portray Lincoln like this. Because for me personally, it really feels like that Lincoln has officially losing his sanity when it comes to the mental state that I've stated earlier, when it comes to his vision of forever paying off his debt with Lola. Because to tell you the truth, I don't find Lincoln stupid in this, even though that he ignored the hints that the Loud Sisters have been giving him. Because for me personally, it's almost like that the amount of time that he tries to do the right thing, which ends up backfiring on him when it comes to the mistakes from Bizarratorium and others, when it's mostly an honest mistake, it wouldn't make a difference considering that his sisters just can't be able to think clearly, and even though that they didn't do anything towards his hobby of David Steele, like how they really made his hobby towards Ace Savvy really problematic from King to the Con, I'm gonna be real with you. If you really want me to take this family seriously when it comes to them getting along, don't make them tours. It's not that difficult to do. It would have made this whole debt thing that Lincoln has to deal with his sisters more understandable, because as far as I'm concerned, I don't even find Lincoln as the bad guy, because when he tries to help out Lola, he actually shows to us that he's actually capable of preventing a mistake. But when it comes to accidental, I can't really blame him on that, because literally every accidental thing that he did when it comes to breaking the stuff that Lola buys doesn't really make him a bad character or someone to root against, because for me personally, if he was careless, then I would understand why, but at the same time, I don't think he was really careless when it comes to his obsession with the whale David Steele collectible, and just by seeing Lola in this, it's difficult to side with her, knowing full well that she's just upping the prices, which for me personally at this point, Lola seriously needs to change. Like, the fact that she's the one who blurted out that Lincoln stole away from Bizarratorium, although that wasn't really the case. I'm starting to convince that anyone who agrees with Lola, or just not making a stand against Lola, is just difficult to find her character any likability, which makes her possibly one of the worst Loud sisters next to Lynn even to this day, because this is just becoming really, really old, and this isn't like Read Aloud, because as far as I'm concerned, Lincoln wouldn't make hints towards having Lola to read a book than what the Loud sisters did in this episode. Like, seriously, watch this episode and see how Lincoln is handling the situation of having his debt with Lola. He accidentally crashed her car, which was accidental because there was someone in the way, and then the thing that he crashed in was water hydrant or whatever, and it sprayed on Lola's car, which was also accidental, and yet Lola still wants him to pay for it. And to tell you the truth, when we witness them going to the mall, Lincoln is preventing to have the samples land on Lola's stuff, and he succeeded, but then he got tripped due to Lola's stuff, and it caused all of Lola's stuff to be covered in mustard and stuff. In all honesty, all of this was accidental. If it was something that he was not paying attention to, it would have been one thing, but at the same time, doing a last-second decision before causing an accident is really impossible. And just by seeing Lola in this episode, she isn't really a character that describes as a main character in this, despite her name being in the description of the episode itself. It's mainly her being a tool than nothing more for Lincoln, which is really a shame, because if this is supposed to be about Lincoln's sisters deserving respect, do more than just having Lincoln pay them the money back, because as far as I'm concerned, with them being tools, they're not really obstacles anymore. And when it comes to Lincoln, he really feels like that him carrying the episode is literally the best that what he can do when it comes to the newer episodes of The Loud House. Trust me when I say this, if you really think that every time that Lincoln cries like a baby, mainly from the Loud House movie, while acting like a baby, or any of the stuff that he did in this episode when it comes to his obsession with a well David Steele collectible that he has to get away in order to pay off his sisters, even though it's not enough? No. I'm still not buying it. No matter what people feel, especially from the Loud House critic when he described his opinions of the Loud House movie briefly. Because every time I think about it, it really feels like that he's always going to be handicapped in no matter what he does. And even if he does do a mistake, for me personally, it's just done with poor execution with other problems involving the episode itself. And for me personally, it's just too much to focus on. When Steam Team UK talked about the Friends in Dry Places episode, he's mostly against Lincoln, which I can understand his opinion, but at the same time, I don't agree with his opinion 100% when it comes to the other episodes afterwards, because when I try to think about Lincoln in these scenarios, and whenever he tries to do something for himself, and then when he does something terribly and he does something stupid, it just really feels like that they just wanted him to be in this position, because I always look in the point of view of the writers rather than the character themselves, because I'm really starting to think that Lincoln is really losing his sanity, and his depression is slowly getting the better of him, because the fact that he actually cried in this episode, even though that he did cry in some occasions, this really feels like that he's trying to take his passion towards David Steele way too literally in comparison to his passion towards Ace Savvy, which we're all familiar with from Canes of the Con. And even though that this episode isn't in the same levels when it comes to bad quality of Canes of the Con, it only made me think that Lincoln didn't cry whatsoever off screen after the events of Canes of the Con. And then when it comes to this, it really feels like that even if he tries to do something will probably backfire on him, and it's not mainly for the wrong reasons that he did when it comes to what Steam Team WK described him in Friends in Dry Places. Because, believe me when I say this, they probably wanted Lincoln to not have a job after the interim episode from Season 2 or anything else for the sake of making him weaker in comparison to the Loud Sisters. And to tell you the truth, I'm still not rooting against him, because for me personally, if he's searching for a well collectible, even if it's not that bigger in comparison to the professions that the Loud Sisters do, then that's basically really what I feel about his struggles in general. Here's another problem that I have with the episode, and that's Lily that needs money from Lincoln, and no offense, but I still find it difficult to believe. Even though that in Less Man she did got money, but at the same time, Lincoln was still the master of convincing, and that happened way earlier in the series, since that Lily didn't have that outfit yet from Season 5 and towards now. Because for me personally, I find it difficult to believe that Lily, despite being a little older when it comes to the newer seasons, would have money of her own, because she still spent that money in Less Man along with the other Loud Sisters. So I find it difficult to believe that she should be in this episode for the sake of getting money that Lincoln is owed to, even though that she is still a baby. Because believe me when I say this, despite this being the cartoon, I found it difficult to believe to have Lily being one of the Loud Sisters that Lincoln needs to pay off. Because, to be perfectly real with you, they probably wanted Lincoln to be worse by having him not paying attention to Lily while accidentally hitting her while Lily's trying to give Lincoln a hint. And to tell you the truth, it still didn't convince me, and considering that Lily didn't cry whatsoever, how am I supposed to feel sympathy towards Lily in this? Especially since that she is still too long to use money. I can understand Lola, but believe me, when I'm not feeling sympathy towards the baby who is literally the closest towards Lincoln, it really shows of how she is still a tool like the other Loud Sisters, and mostly a different person rather than being a baby while being a baby without getting money, like how she did from Yes Man, but mainly from the Master of Convincing. Also, another glaring problem in all this is that Todd was rusty when Lisa is trying to give hits towards Lincoln, and she needs to clean up Todd. And when Lincoln gives back the money to Lisa, she's planning to clean up Todd. But in this clip alone, this was taking place while Lincoln is trying to owe up to Lisa. And you can see clearly that Todd is completely clean. So the way I see it, Todd needing a cleanup or an oil change doesn't really feel that important, considering that he's mostly a tool like every other Loud sibling in this episode, which for me personally sums up a lot that I don't feel the need to root against Lincoln, because the more I see this, the more I realize that there are multiple problems in this episode that doesn't even try to make the Loud sisters better when it comes to getting the money that they deserve. If you really think that Lincoln stated that he really needs a coffin for real by doing so many things at once, to tell you the truth, this is pretty much him reaching his breaking point. Because for me personally, the fact that he's still doing the right thing and still not thinking for himself when it comes to the predicament that he's in while trying to make up for his Loud sisters, I'm going to convince that if he did took a job, then something will definitely backfire on him and it will put him back into square one. Let's be real with you guys. I understand that people have been calling these episodes Lincoln torture porns for literally the most over-exaggerated reasons, but as far as I'm concerned, whenever you look at Lincoln's character in this, and even when you try to look of him being at wrong when it comes to decisions that he shouldn't take, at the same time when you look at the alternative, if he did take the alternative, he would still be in the same position when it comes to him being miserable. Because for me personally, every time I look at Lincoln in this, he can't be able to make things right for himself and his Loud sisters, when all I can think of is that the Loud sisters aren't really sisters in general, while they'll be mostly tours, considering that most of them don't do much. Like, Luna, Lana, and Luann isn't in this episode, so for me personally, this really feels like they took a book from the Taunting Hour by not having all the sisters gain up on Lincoln. And to tell you the truth, with Luna and Luann being the characters who agree with the other characters that Lincoln is a life ruiner, they still didn't have Lana in that episode, especially in this episode, even though that she did gain up on Lincoln in Bizarratorium, but not really one of her worst moments. I'm really starting to convince that the people who make these episodes recently having favoritism towards the sibling relationship of Lincoln and Lana, considering that Game Off is one of the best episodes from Season 4. Believe me when I say this, am I starting to convince that the people behind the show don't want a bad moment between Lincoln and Lana? Because the way I see it, it really feels like that they have a close connection, even more than Lincoln and Lily, and even Lincoln and Luna. Because the way I see it, it really feels like they don't want to have a bad moment between Lincoln and Lana. Believe me when I say this, is that if Lana was in this episode, I'm pretty sure that she wouldn't give hints towards Lincoln when it comes to paying off her debt, all the while being mostly fair towards him, even though that Lincoln still owes her a lot of money. Let's get into the bit where Lincoln manages to pay off all of her sister's money, because Kara, who is running the store at the mall, told Lincoln that the collectibles that he found weren't valuable with the new collectibles coming out. But then she saw a really rare collectible that Lincoln found while trying to find multiple David Steele figures from the boxes that was different from the ones that he found, but not in the same levels as the collectible that he's looking for. Which made her so excited that she's willing to pay Lincoln the amount of money he can pay off her sisters. And to tell you the truth, the fact that she isn't much of a tour than Lincoln's sisters is really saying a lot. And after people watch this episode, they're gonna see another Lincoln ship, and it's gonna be a healthier one than his relationships with his sisters, and I'm not exaggerating. Because to tell you the truth, the fact that she is more understanding, and the fact that she's willing to do something that doesn't make her tour really sums up a lot that These Lincoln ships is becoming more common that Nickelodeon isn't even trying to hide them. And the fact that Lincoln in the Woodley Loud house in season 2 is gonna have a crush towards one of Lynn's friends, which he's moving forward from Charlie by not having a crush. I'm probably gonna be making a comparison video off of Charlie's first appearance all the while Lynn's friend's first appearance, because to tell you the truth, at this point, Lincoln being shipped with multiple girls isn't really much of a secret at this point, and Nickelodeon is probably aware of it, just doesn't want the people working on the Loud House know it. I'm pretty sure that with them not having the Loud House production people reading any fanfics or doing anything involving research involving the fanbase itself, I'm pretty sure that they're familiar with how people are so obsessed with Lincoln shipping with multiple girls to the point that if it's their way of gathering more attention while making more seasons, then I'm starting to convince that's really their own way of continuing on this show if it's one of their main methods, just by after watching this episode. You know, guys, when you want an episode to wait until it premieres in the United States to have it be valuable, but when I say valuable, it has to be important. But when your curiosity gets the better of you and you watch the episode from beginning to end, and it's not as valuable or something that you hoped for, then there's really no point into waiting for the episode to come out. Unlike, well, I have to wait until before the Creek movie came out last month in order to upload my review of it, which I made when it aired digitally in December of 2023. Believe me, when I don't have respect towards this episode, when it's mainly the fact that this episode doesn't deserve respect, then I'm mostly doing a favor for all of you, even though you would still watch the episode when it comes out in the United States, or watch it right away from Kim Cartoon. Because in all honesty, this episode is one of the worst episodes of Season 7. This episode not being a complete Lincoln and Lola episode, and it really destroyed the hopes of so many people who really wanted this episode to be just like read aloud and not having Lola a terrible character. In all honesty, this just sums up a lot that nothing is going to improve, and the comment that I saw from one of the clips involving this episode that was uploaded, well, he says that the Loud House fandom is gonna see this as Lincoln's family being dysfunctional and toxic towards Lincoln for such a long time. To tell you the truth, he's right, and to tell you the truth, when it comes to the Loud House fandom being toxic, when it comes to them defending Lincoln, to tell you the truth, when they're rooting against the Loud Sisters, it's difficult to blame them for how the Loud Sisters are portrayed in this. That's how much that it's just difficult to avoid them when it just keeps coming back to you with no avoidable of finding better alternatives. If anything, this episode wouldn't even suit for my future Loud House project where it's gonna be a sequel towards the Lincoln Loud video, because in all honesty, it isn't because the episode is about Lincoln, but it's mainly the fact that the Loud Sisters are just still being tools and they're not doing much other than just being a tool for Lincoln to work with, to the point that it just doesn't make me convinced that they're actual sisters towards Lincoln, and when Lincoln is thinking about his sisters, he's just making his mental state a lot more worse when it comes to his vision of Lola, where he has to be in debt with her for the rest of his life. And in all honestly, is it really possible to see Lincoln as both things of how Steam Team Redub UK described him from Brawl in the Family? Because in all honesty, after watching this episode, I'm not buying it. I really don't. If it's worth doing one thing rather than both, then it's better to avoid toxicity altogether. And even though that Scene Team WK isn't toxic, I don't even understand how he doesn't see any of these problems. He's either avoiding toxicity, but at the same time, it's worth knowing that some of this is actually important. Anyway, that's my perspective of Big Barrel and Steele. I'm giving this episode a 3 out of 10, and if you're gonna watch this episode when it airs for the first time, please take my opinions into consideration when it comes to the problems of this episode, because for me personally, if you're still going against Lincoln even after all this, then for me personally, you really need to understand of how I'm not rooting against him completely, because it not only is it getting repetitive when it comes to these elements, but it really feels like the show isn't even trying at all, especially since that with this episode airing years after the infamous episodes, it really feels like that it's draining from showcasing the negativity, and yet it's not even bothering to do something positive with it.